Welcome to the deep dive. You know, we often think we have a pretty solid grip on, well, the basics, right? Like time, history.
Even simple words like rural.
Exactly. But what if? What if our very definitions of reality are shifting right under our feet? Radically shifting.
It's a huge thought. What we've all sort of accepted as known might just be, I don't know, the first layer.
Yeah.
Or maybe a story we've just moved past.
That's precisely it. And that's really our mission today. We're diving deep into this really unique perspective from a source recorded just a few days back, June 21st.
Right.
And the speaker argues humanity is entering what they actually call a time zone, not geographical, but a unique period forcing everyone to redefine basically everything. We're going to unpack some pretty mind-bending ideas here.
Yeah.
About our past, reality itself, even this idea of an unseen enemy, all seen through this one very specific viewpoint.
And what's really interesting is how the speaker kind of anchors this huge universal idea in their own very recent personal experience.
Yeah, the relocation.
Exactly. They just moved somewhere in the Americas. It was raining. Wi-Fi was a mess, lost batteries.
Oh yeah, I mentioned having a stalker. Both them and their partner, Heidi, and needing to hide their location.
Right. And that personal struggle to redefine rural for themselves.
Yeah.
You know, contrasting their experience with Heidi's urban-rural idea, realizing their old place was actual wilderness.
It becomes this perfect little metaphor, doesn't it, for this bigger universal need to just re-examine everything.
It really does. It sets the stage perfectly for what the source calls the time zone and this summer of emergence.
Okay, so this time zone, explain that a bit more. Not like, Eastern versus Pacific.
No. It's described as a unique temporal area, like bounded by certain events, not geography. And the idea is it's a space where humans discover they're part of some larger emergence.
It's emergence. Okay.
Yeah, and the core insight is that this isn't just some vague shift. It's a specific, defined time zone in our collective experience. And its purpose seems to be to force this profound reevaluation of reality.
And during this time, the source says we're shedding these old precepts, these ideas carried over from, what was it, the Kali Yuga?
The term used, yeah.
Yeah.
From ancient traditions signifying, an age of darkness or conflict. We're supposedly shedding that baggage.
Because we're realizing, what was the quote? We don't know a whole lot about the language was stronger.
Any fucking thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the core realization hitting us.
Right. But the most important thing, according to the source, it's not about finding new definitions right away.
Exactly. The speaker really emphasizes this.
Yeah.
The key is to keep open this idea of uncertainty. Don't rush to lock things down again.
And this summer of emergence is where we are now.
That's the current phase, yes. And it's apparently moving towards a destruction phase, but specifically the destruction of illusion. That's slated for the next 25 years or so.
Destruction of illusion. That sounds intense.
It does, but then it's followed by what this source calls an incredible outpouring of creativity, an innovation boom potentially lasting thousands of years.
Wow. So a tough transition phase, but leading to something huge.
That's the idea presented, a necessary breakdown before a breakthrough.
Okay, that idea of tearing down illusions. It feels like it applies directly to how we view our past, based on what the source claims next, like starting with Darwin.
Yeah, the source is pretty blunt. Darwinism, mainstream evolutionary science. Gotta go. It needs to be shed.
Why? What's the argument?
The claim is based on, quote, millions and millions of objects around the Earth that supposedly indicate humans didn't evolve the way we think, and that, say, 40,000 years ago, we were definitely not cave people.
Okay, so a much more advanced ancient past than we generally accept.
That's the implication,
Which
leads into this whole concept of the Tartarian civilization.
Right, Tartaria, presented as this advanced civilization that we somehow helped destroy without even knowing.
That's the narrative. And the evidence pointed to is often these old buildings with really strange features, architectural anomalies. Well, apparently, these Tartarian buildings, you can't find obvious bathrooms or plumbing, running water, kitchens, even places for food storage.
Huh. So how did they live?
The theory put forward is that they were harvesting energy directly. Static electromagnetic base frequencies for heating, cooling, maybe more, which would, potentially negate the need for a lot of that infrastructure.
And the materials themselves, not just stone.
That's another point. The source suggests they might look like stone, but could be some kind of polymer concrete, maybe even, get this, 3D printed.
3D printed back then.
Megalithic structures we can't duplicate now, potentially made with techniques we think are modern. It just It turns everything on its head.
It really does. And this reevaluation goes even further, doesn't it? Beyond just buildings. There's
Yeah.
that story about giants.
Yes. The personal anecdote from the speaker
Yeah.
about their distant relative back in the 1920s.
Paid extremely well, like $1 a day, which is huge then.
A fantastic sum, yeah. To do what? To haul giant human bones off the California coast near Catalina Island and just dump them overboard.
And this was supposedly for the Smithsonian, with ties to Freemasons.
Allegedly, yes. The source presents it as a deliberate effort to hide, to obscure our actual history. A cover-up involving giant humanoids.
It's an extraordinary claim, and it fits this broader theme from the source about our timeline being completely distorted.
Right. The argument is that history isn't just slightly off, it's been deliberately manipulated. Like an extra 1,000 years added here, another 2,000 years added there.
Meaning, we're not as advanced in our own timeline as we think. Our history is shorter.
Potentially much shorter. The source even floats the idea that the medieval ages might have actually been the 700s, not the 1700s. That drastically compresses our perception of progress.
And physical evidence besides buildings. You mentioned pyramids.
Yeah, the source notes the discovery of hundreds of thousands of pyramids globally, not just a few famous ones.
Hundreds of thousands.
That's the claim. With hints of even bigger structures underneath Giza, maybe MOA. And the suggestion is they weren't tombs. They might have been power plants.
Power plants. Okay. So if our history is potentially an illusion and ancient tech was maybe way beyond what we thought, what about reality itself? The source dives into physics, too.
Oh, yeah. Deep dive. It talks about a radical shift happening right now in physics. Scientists, the source claims, no longer see atoms as these little solid balls.
Okay, so what are they then?
More like an illusion presented by frequencies of energy moving very fast. Think less of a solid marvel, more like a super fast vibration that just seems solid.
Right, okay. And the implication of that is?
It means, according to the source, that relativistic rational materialism is gone. Our old, comfortable, clockwork universe view of solid matter, it's outdated. There's so much more to discover.
Which opens the door to, well, more complex ideas like quantum stuff, Planck minimum, qualia.
Exactly. The Planck minimum is presented as the absolute smallest possible unit of anything action energy, like the universe's minimum transaction fee.
And qualia.
That's framed as the minimum amount of energy or action or expression required to get across a concept. The smallest and meaningful packet of, say, information or experience.
It's getting very philosophical.
It does. And it connects to consciousness directly. The source brings up the book Irreducible by the physicist who invented the silicon chip.
And his argument is
that physicists can never describe consciousness using math because fundamentally mathematics derives from consciousness. Math is a tool within consciousness. It can't step outside itself to describe its own source.
So we're kind of stuck inside the system we're trying to understand.
That's the idea. We're within the complexity of the ontology, the underlying structure of reality, and we can only describe it by looking up from our position inside it.
Which, interestingly, the source connects back to ancient wisdom again.
Yeah, suggesting that the real ancients, if you strip out those disputed extra millennia, they understood reality differently. They saw it as emanating from the psychic aspects of our personalities, almost like a projection.
A projection?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so history's maybe wrong, reality isn't solid, and then the source says humanity is under attack.
Yeah, this is probably the most alarming claim, not metaphorically under attack, but literally. An escalating conflict.
Escalating from when?
From ancient times, apparently. The source mentions Genghis Khan, depicting him not as we know him, but as the actual king of Tartaria, through to modern warfare, like it's an ongoing battle.
And things like pandemics, mass movements.
Presented as potentially engineered events, giant slaughters, like the Spanish flu, other depopulation agendas, all framed as deliberate attacks.
And there was that weird correlation mentioned.
Right, the source points out the timing. The first spread of transcontinental telegraph lines coinciding with the first outbreak of flu ever, implying a non-biological trigger or factor.
And this connects to chemtrails.
Yes. The belief presented is that an enemy is actively trying to chemtrail us out of existence.
An enemy that thinks how?
In terms of complexity, laying layer upon layer upon layer of deception. The example given was weather modification companies.
Staffed by young pilots with no kids.
Right, 90% young men acting as unwitting, useful idiots in a much larger, darker scheme, according to this view.
And this enemy has a name in the source. The Demiurge.
Yes.
Yeah.
Defined as disincarnate evil that doesn't like humanity. And it's allegedly behind everything, the chemtrails, big pharma, big food, big government, all the bigs.
That's a lot, and the goal is...
The source claims the goal is stark. Make humanity extinct within like 2 generations.
Wow.
And that right now, humanity is caught in a proxy war between this Demiurge and the Ontology, that underlying structure of reality we talked about.
And there were some very specific political predictions tied to this.
Yes, very specific and, frankly, controversial. The source claims the Ontology is actively influencing world leaders, mentioning the Trumpetas, Putin, even Xi, to prevent an Israeli mistake.
A mistake involving what?
Potential strikes on Australia and parts of Asia, possibly linked back to something called the Great Plan that was discussed in the Q documents.
Okay, Q documents. That's referencing the QAnon phenomenon.
It seems to be, yes. It's really important for us, and for you listening, to stress that we're reporting on the claims made in this source material. We're not endorsing these specific political viewpoints or predictions ourselves.
Absolute crucial distinction. Okay, so if there's this massive attack, is there any hope? What's the counter-narrative here?
There is. The source argues that humanity is, in fact, waking up.
How? Why now?
Largely attributed to the internet. It allows free minds to cross-pollinate, to share information and connect dots outside of mainstream control.
And the source mentions the woo community.
Yeah, it's an interesting take that people often dismissed as woo, those exploring alternative spirituality, consciousness, etc., are actually becoming complexity scientists.
How so?
By studying their own consciousness, their own actions, their own experiences within this emergence, they're creating a feedback and feed-forward loop, essentially accelerating the collective understanding in real time.
And the ontology, this underlying reality, it's helping.
That's the assertion. The ontology wants to support humanity. It's providing awareness, like a player helping their character in a game, to help us fight back and overcome.
Which brings us back to that 25-year period.
The destruction of the illusion. That difficult phase we have to go through, according to the source, before the immense creativity kicks in. It's presented as a necessary purification almost.
Okay. So what about the immediate future? Did the source give any, specific timelines or predictions for the coming months?
It did offer some temporal markers, yeah, for this year. July was predicted to have an elevated level of tension. Not necessarily war-related, but other disruptions. Maybe even tension with a happy side, like building towards something positive.
Okay. Then what?
August, a slight sag, a dip, but then September, October, November are flagged as potentially a really rough period within this time zone.
Rough how? What's expected to happen?
The source predicts 2 main reactions playing out across society during that rough patch.
Okay, what's the first one?
It involves people who were previously, let's say, involved with or serving the Demiurge side. They're expected to have a strong emotional backlash against their former masters.
A kind of turning on the system they were part of.
That seems to be the idea. And the second group.
Much larger, apparently. These are people newly awakening to the idea of this enemy and the attacks on humanity.
And their reaction.
Predicted to be a turn towards a religious response, but described as temporary, potentially problematic, very emotionally charged, frothy was the word used.
Frothy, okay. And how long does that last?
Expected to extend through January or February of next year.
But it's not seen as a stable endpoint, this religious fervor.
No. The prediction is that this response will face degradation. Why? Because a new ontological paradigm within science, this new understanding of reality we discussed, will start to impact religions themselves.
Causing conflict within religious institutions.
Exactly, leading to turmoil within churches. This was apparently noted in what the source calls old alter reports, alternative intelligence reports.
Interesting. So even religion gets redefined in this process.
Seems so, but ultimately, despite the rough patches, the speaker holds out hope, right? For tangible outcomes.
Yeah. The source ends that section on a note of personal hope, suggesting that this whole new understanding, this redefinition, it could lead to us engineering relatively cool stuff like anti-gravity vehicles. Yeah. Within maybe the next 25 years.
Anti-gravity, okay. From cosmic battles to cool tech, it covers a lot of ground.
It absolutely does. So just to kind of wrap up this deep dive, we've journeyed through this one really compelling perspective that argues we're in this profound moment of redefinition.
Yeah, questioning everything. Our history, science, the nature of reality, even who or what might be opposing humanity.
It really pushes us and pushes you listening to think about what personal redefinitions you might be going through, what long-held beliefs maybe need a second look right now.
Which leads us to that final provocative thought, doesn't it?
It does, if. And it's a big if based on this source. But if our history, our reality, is largely an illusion we're just starting to see through.
Then what new possibilities open up? And maybe what new responsibilities come with that knowledge? Especially when we embrace the idea that maybe, just maybe, we really don't know a whole lot about anything at all yet.